I'm going to have trouble with this, you know. But I'm just a mess, you know. I went, well, I just can't. I feel, you know, grossly uncomfortable seeing anything of myself or hearing anything of myself. If you just kind of sit on it until I expire and then do what you want to do with it, if you'd done the right thing and come 1 minute after one rather than 2 minutes before, I would have cleared that and I just would have felt much better about everything, you know. Would you like a cup of tea? Could you pass me a cup or two? Oh, not the red one. The red one tends to get cobwebs in it. I was a junior postal officer going to the city every day from Ivanhoe. I mean, that's not very far, but I mean, I got transferred from the PMG to Heidelberg Repatriation Hospital, where I became a theatre orderly. And I mean, it wasn't that much different to delivering telegrams. But no, it was totally wonderful. And I just adored that job, you know. But I probably, when I settled down in that job, I probably took a few liberties, I think. And I had it at a hospital in Kew called New Haven, and it was a dingy kind of place, and I was in a tiny little room in a bed, and there was a chair, and that was it. I mean, it all happened inside, so it's not the fact that it was a depressing sort of place didn't really seem to me to influence it much, because it was all happening inside my head. But later on they got much more liberal and they let people wander around the garden in daytime. You could call someone if you wanted something. It was quite bizarre in many ways, yeah. You see, you're so far out of it that you're not going to relate to humans anyway, you know. Well, you go through this kind of dream. Within that dream, that's what gets me, to be honest. It just blew me apart, really. That's the problem. Language fails miserably, you know. It's just indescribable, and it was totally wonderful. I mean, there were bad sequences. Pure hell, you know, but most of it was pretty good. 66. I went on for a few years, remember? Yeah. I met a guy a few years later who in the last session he had a sexual orgasm. Yeah, I mean, he had an orgasm. And he firmly believed that the orgasm was a major part of the whole thing. This thing was an orgasm. It was a total mind orgasm that went for hours, you know. And it would seem to me that a sexual orgasm wouldn't really be noticed in one of my sessions it wore off very quickly, and the doctor gave it to me intravenously, and that was, I just went whoop. I literally felt like I'd turned inside out, and I thought he'd done me. I thought I was gone. You know, here he is slowly, and I thought I was, you know, I thought he'd killed me, you know. But not that I was worried, because you know, I mean, if I'd had any inkling of how explosive or how, you know, the power of the stuff, I wouldn't have gone near it. I mean, at that stage of my life, I'd already been through a lot of weird stuff. I was seeing in 2D. It was so fucking scary. And they had these heaters, these hydronic heaters that were never turned on. You know, they were always off, and they were cold. I used to kind of ground myself by grabbing hold of them because they were kind of icy cold and kind of reassuring. You know, they felt real. You know, when I was losing it, you know. Also, at that time, I had I was scratching my back with a ruler once, and I bent my head back. I don't know why, but I hit a blood vessel and blanked out. And from that point on, I had migraines regularly, and with all the aura stuff, you know. And I thought I was going blind. And nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what migraines were in those days. And from then on, I just had a really bad time. You know, I left school I left school when I was 13. Well, see, the other thing I was changing schools a lot. I went to Mary State School, finished state school, then went round the corner to Northcote High School, and that's where all the shit hit the fan. And then we moved to Ivanhoe, and I started going to Ivanhoe Grammar. I wasn't learning there. Teachers treated me like an idiot, basically. You know, they would just give me a book to read, and they would ignore me. And that's when I decided to leave school. And I don't know, I think things can't have been good with my father because he didn't, I can't remember any discussion about it, Renee. In hindsight, I feel that my parents would have been anxious for me to stay at school. Very scary. And then, you know, I went to work and I didn't do well at work, you know. And I was an apprentice jeweller for 3 months. Apprenticed to a Masonic regalia manufacturer. But I broke too many saw blades. And due to some unfortunate experiences with ether, namely having 8 teeth extracted at the dental hospital, they got out a bottle of ether, cleaned some gold lettering off a bag, a Masonic bag. I couldn't handle the smell of ether. I had to leave the room, and my boss said, "Get back in here or you're fired." I said, put away that bottle of ether. They just fired me on the spot, you know, after 3 months. But I get more work since I retired. I don't get more money. I lived in the country until I was about 9. And things were great until I got rheumatic fever, and when I was about 7, and then I got it again when I was 9 with nephritis and hepatitis. In bed for 7 months. So that was the main undoing. That was the beginning of all the trouble, really, because I had to do fifth grade twice, and then later I did second form twice before leaving school. Went to work, then I went back to school, went to a special class in North Melbourne for problem kids, you know. I immediately wanted to create, you know. I'd always been a bit of a drawer as a child, but I think I lost that and everything else, you know, when I had all the physical sickness, which led to falling apart, which resulted in going screwy at school and stuff. The next big thing to happen was the acid, and then after that, I was given an invalid pension at 21, and I could have stayed on that for the rest of my life, you know, taking it easy pretty much. I used to hang out I used to go to this clinic in Malvern where they had group discussions and stuff. Sadly, the antipsychotics were very popular at that stage, and they said to me, do you ever feel kind of unhappy and as if you can't get on top of things? So I said, yeah. And they suggested that I take some pills. Occasionally I'd stub out a cigarette in a bowl of chips or something like that. And I didn't realise it at the time, but it was the bloody pills I was taking that was making me do these things. And the biggest downside of the pills was that they put an end to one's orgasms. That was the worst thing. That has made me so fucking angry that they don't tell you beforehand. And that wiped out sexual sensation. Like my orgasms were just signalled the end of foreplay. You know, there was no sensation involved. And that lasted for decades, you know. I swore off antipsychotics, as they call them, I don't know what, you know, but antidepressants and stuff after 3 years. And they kind of warned me that I shouldn't give them up just like that, but I did and never looked back. But having taken them for 3 years, they wiped out all that stuff for 3 decades. And it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I started, or late 50s, you know, that I started getting sensation back. I slowly kind of got this desire to create, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. It started out really bad. I was going to this clinic in Malvern where I did a lot of lying around in the sun, and it was very pleasant for a few years. And they decided that I needed to go to an industrial clinic to kind of prepare me to go back to work. Now, I don't know what that was all about, because I had an invalid pension, which was, you know, kind of permanent. I didn't have to reapply, but somehow I found myself at this clinic, and it was no fun. It was a pain in the arse, actually. It was very boring. Had to do repetitive kind of monotonous tasks, stupid stuff like you walk along past these little cubicle things, and you take a piece of paper from each one and put them in a little pile, and all the paper was identical, you know. It was sort of weird. The doctor who ran the place was insisting that I take these pills, which were wiping me out. At the end of the day, I couldn't remember the day, you know. This doctor, who I couldn't stand, as I remember, he said, if you don't take the pills, we'll have to put you away. And this kind of really scared me. One way to escape this doctor would be to admit myself to a psychiatric hospital. And I'd heard about Larundel. It was a mixed ward where they were doing a much more open approach to people and problems, blah, blah, blah. I had my 21st birthday at my parents' place, and I admitted myself to Larundel. I went through a week of sheer hell. They put me onto a drug called Largactil, or chlorpromazine. in liquid form. I can still remember the taste of it, like drinking liquid rubber. Anyway, it was gross, and I was just in a delirious state for, I thought 3 weeks, but it was only a week. I was in this huge room that was full of beds, and I barely got out of bed. Then I found myself in seawater. It was just totally fantastic. And I was there for a year. I went home on weekends, but there 5 days a week. And then, just at that point, a friend from Larundel, and he introduced me to home experimental movie making. I started making little movies. It wasn't long at all before I started thinking, well, you know, this little rectangle on the wall's not good enough. It's got to fill the wall at least, you know. And then I'm thinking, well, it can't be something that only runs for a few minutes, you know. It's got to stay there, you know. And so I got a slide projector and started putting things in the slide projector, you know. Eventually people started inviting me to project when bands were playing. At the end of the 70s, rock and roll had exacerbated my hearing problems so much that I decided I couldn't afford to keep on doing indoor rock and roll. And so I started thinking about what I could do outdoors, and that's when I just started experimenting and projecting on buildings and things, you know. Still using lounge room type projectors, mind you. The roadies had set up their lights, you know, their lights to light the band, and they wouldn't give a stuff about any little guy trying to get an image on the screen, you know. Most of the time they'd be using their brightest colours, which would be yellows, to light the band. Well, I was trying to make my own high power projectors, and I tried to learn about carbon arc projectors, you know, which is all kind of scary stuff, but they're incredibly bright to get a good image onto a big building, or even onto a hillside. And that's sort of, I was sort of projecting on all sorts of things, but buildings are very attractive. The carbon arc projectors gave off noxious fumes, you know, and they had big leads that were covered in asbestos and stuff, and, you know, it'd be a bit tricky nowadays to do. But then the Pani came along, the Pani projector came along, and I bought that in 1987, and at that time it was the only one in the country. One ambition of mine was to redo my polka dotting of the exhibition buildings. The original show was in 1983, and I wanted to do a 30-year anniversary. And because it was, unbeknownst to me, it was the very first outdoor large-scale building projection. So convincing that, you see the image and you don't see the mountain. Or you can actually see the image in the air as well, that's right. And virtually run it off the car battery or something with an inverter. They're a moving head thing, and I'm thinking, I'd like to have one on my little car. Well, I've done things in the car, I've done high power projections from the car whilst driving. And I only really did it a few times, but the first night I did it, I was pulled over by the cops twice. They said, "We don't mind you doing it, just don't do it while you're driving." I had this joystick next to me, and as I was driving along, I could direct this light either forward or backwards or sideways, anywhere. Or I was projecting this super bright image on the road in front of me, revolving mandala things. But that required a generator in the back of the van and stuff. You do it nowadays or on an inverter, I didn't ever imagine that projection onto buildings would become a big thing. I've got the E-meter. It's probably the only one, I think. They've got modern ones, but I think it may well be the only existing old one, I had a friend who was actually living next door to the Scientology Centre in Spring Street, and he was heavily into anything kind of borderline when it came to a spiritual kind of blah blah, Sadly, it's not that spectacular, But it does have, electropsychometer on it, It's just three knobs, really, three big knobs. There were no sockets to plug into. So it's, the wires for the tin cans were not in evidence. It comes with a throne, and people sit on the throne and a skull cap is placed and measure the gullibility of the victim. That's right. It's in storage. Yeah, it's quite large and elaborate. Yeah, it's very ornate. Yeah, everything kind of indicates gullibility, I think. No, I never really got the audio together though, I want to get the audio together. I want to actually sample the victim's voice, etc., and modify it perhaps, and I don't know, I'll have to work on that. mean, I've been obsessed with them since the 70s, since I found them in the 70s. Oh, because I've had absolutely no art training. Or, I look at what other people do and stuff, but it's always been a bit of a problem. I don't know how to put them together, but I'm making some progress. But it's a bit sad that I've got so many and they're so beautiful and I can't put them together. I have. I'm beginning to, but considering the fact that, I probably won't be here in 10 years, I've wasted a hell of a lot of time, In 20 years I'll be just about 90. Might still be here. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? I didn't think I'd be here now. I found it on the site of what is now Docklands, when they were clearing Docklands, back in the 70s. Right. And it was, just a huge expanse of nothing, Docklands, and they were just getting rid of all the old factories, and it was on the site of a foundry, And I found a little thumbnail pattern. And I thought, what on earth is that, And and then I found that thing, and it was just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. People seem to think it was possibly a pattern for a gate valve for a dam. When I originally got them, just taking everything I could get, and then it slowly dawned on me that I should be choosy, So I just want to get rid of this lot actually. A few huon pine, but mostly it was kauri pine. They're a bit hard to see from here, but they're about 7 to 10 foot long. Juicy conrods. The rest of it you wouldn't recognise. You probably don't recognise conrods, do you? Took me a while. Sadly, I couldn't. Last time I tried to open that shed there, I couldn't. It won't open. There's not much in there, mind you, but I can't remember what's in there. Sandblaster. Now what's in here? I can't remember. A very nice pattern for a target. Pretty cute, eh? A pattern for a target, for target practice, A little person to shoot. I got quite a few patterns from the ammunition factory in Footscray. Hence those bullet-shaped things in the lounge. what can I say? I just thought about this thing the other day. I wish I hadn't left it outside. It's quite... I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, I'm not going to sell everything. But, I mean, the house is rubbish. When people have valued the place, well, I had it valued a few years ago, and they said 300 or... No, they said 290 or 300 without the house. I mean, this room is kind of okay, but it's not, the insulation is lousy, and so it's very hard. It's not warm. Well, I mean, sometimes when I come inside, I put something extra on. You know? It's true. I'm still going to sell. I know it seems impossible, and particularly as I'm so obsessive. I'm a hoarder. A real one. I'm hoping to take control somehow. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be very, very hard because, you know, I'm just like my babies, little funny-looking bits of wood. And it's going to be hard to part with them. I mean, my favourites are the tiny ones, certainly. But I am obsessive compulsive, and now, at last, I know why I've always had this problem with tidiness, you know. No, it's not tidy. Well, you weren't here yesterday. Like a few years ago, that top half, or top third, was completely empty, and it was just sort of going to waste. And I thought, well, I didn't know what to do with it, and now it's full of rubbish. Anyway, live and learn. Well, live and don't learn. Yeah, that's right. I can't part with anything. I mean, I'm stuck, but I'm trying to force myself. And what I've done is I've asked a few friends if I can, who have farms, if I can put big sheds on their properties, fill them up with my rubbish, fill them up with my wonderful artworks to be, or wonderful industrial sculpture, and they get it when I expire, you know. And I thought, you know, will people see as much value in it as I do? But I've got a few takers, yeah. So that, you know, that'll hopefully. And knowing that I've still actually got all my stuff, in a sense, you know. But just not having a base will be sort of weird. But I mean, I'll rent a little, you know, I'll just rent a little place, probably either here or up there or somewhere, you know, at least I'll have somewhere. But, you know, having said that, I hope I haven't left it too late, you know. Because sometimes, you know, I wake up in the morning and I don't want to go overseas, you know, I'm happy where I am.
Well, then don't do it.
So, I don't know, it's, you know, that's life when you're old and obsessive, maybe. Like I had wheels turning in very slowly in projectors with just with kind of skies and things, you know, like I'd have an anamorphic lens to stretch the image. And so, you know, it would be sort of skies and things, blah, blah. Or I had sort of variations on kaleidoscopes. I had this sort of crude animation thing where I had 4 projectors with a big flicker wheel in front. And so I'd wind that to the beat of the music. And so it would give 4 flashes per beat. And I made these little images to suit that was quite fun. I had a projector that projected images that flew around the walls, and like the planet, much more ballroom. But I developed that quite a bit, and I had this little flying saucer that flew around the walls, and I got this little laser, and I found a way to get the laser into exactly the same light path, so that I had this tiny light on top of the flying saucer flashing on and off, as it flew around. It was stunning. It stayed in perfect sync, yeah. And just lots of, well, I had all my fluid, my fluid effects were probably some of the most spectacular projections I did, I kind of perfected that. Then there's my revolving things. I had this, my favourite discovery was that this thing, I called a tomoscope, which is a revolving slide that passes through a prism, a three-way prism that also revolves. And so you'd have a revolving image, then you'd have a group of images, and the group could revolve one way, and while the individual slides revolve the other way, so you get a kind of lassitude pattern, It was quite lovely, and I discovered it first. And they started incorporating it in these fancy intelligent lighting devices in later years, and they all claimed that they discovered it. But mind you, I don't know if anyone discovered it before I did, but I certainly had never seen it.
Yeah.
It was always a fibro monster. But the intention was to demolish it and put something decent here. But then, I had a friend who did a bit of building, and he did a lot for me over the years. And he built this room as a theatre. Well, I wanted to use it as a theaterette. That was the intention. And I had it when he finished it, I filled it with 50 theatre seats, And I did little shows here, and I had projectors on that wall where the patterns are there, and had a screen down there, and had about 45 projectors filling that area. I can't remember if I actually had 45 here, and I was would have been about 40 though, filling that wall,
Wow.
There were four carousels which sort of worked on this computer thing to a reel-to-reel tape thing that went with the music, and then I operated the rest of them manually because they were all my little effects. I did 3 shows, mainly because people would arrive with arms full of beer, and after the show the place would smell like a pub. When they were parking, they'd just block off the road. It was just madness. I'd spend the early part of the evening outside trying to get them not to block off the road when they were parking. It was just insane. And people, I had this miniature ticket box thing. Yeah, it was only that wide, and I would kneel behind it. And people would reach around, pat me on the head and say, "Good on you, Hugh," and they wouldn't give me $3. And then I'd start the show, blah, blah, and then, the first show, it was only did 3 shows, probably the first 3 shows, I had a little turntable, that yellow turntable there. is one of those display turntable that has a AC outlet in it. And I had this light bulb. It might have been an antique light bulb or something. And I had it plugged into the turntable. And so I'd actually stand on the turntable and I'd turn around like that, holding this lamp, very slowly. It's like that woman, holding the torch for, is it Metro Golden Mirror? But she wasn't turning around, I was turning around. I was sort of dressed in, I don't know, can't remember, in drag or something. Oh, they like that. I'd run up the back and do my show. And I built a whole fucking theaterette. Took me a year, I can't remember how many grand, it wasn't that much in those days, but all that to do my bloody light shows at home because, it was too complex to do anywhere else. My dog. He's remote controlled. Sit. No, I can't. So what was the question again? So as I was saying, it's subtle. Cut. Get the fuck out of here!